All right, we are looking at the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula gives us the roots, solutions, x-intercepts of a quadratic equation in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. This comes from completing the square on this equation, and if you're interested in seeing that, you can Google it. For now, I'm just going to give you the formula and we're going to do some problems. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. Well, we're taking the coefficients and the numbers in the quadratic equation here. So this is, it's not always the shortest method. Okay, we have solve by square root property. Okay, that's if it's in the form ax squared plus c equals 0, or a times x minus h squared plus k equals 0, or something. If it's in these two forms, vertex form or no b term, then completing our square root property is great. Solve by factoring is the fastest if it's factorable. That's usually in the same form, ax squared plus bx plus c, but it has to be factorable, so you have to kind of test that a little bit first. Then we have solve by completing the square. And some of these methods can be a lot faster than using quadratic formula. But for today, we're going to focus on how to do the quadratic formula, because there are times when completing the square is going to be cumbersome when it comes to the fractions. Let's look at a problem here. X squared plus 18x plus 5 equals 60. It should be negative 60. Okay, so to use quadratic formula, we need to get it equal to 0, which is opposite of completing the square, where we would put the constant on the other side. So we're going to add 60 to both sides, and we get x squared plus 18x plus 65 equals 0. And we identify our a, b, and c. Our a is the coefficient on x squared, so a is 1, and b is 18, and c is 65. So we don't have x's in there. Let's remember what a formula is. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. So let's plug in what we know. X equals negative 18 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 18 squared, minus 4 times 1 times 65, all over 2 times 1. So that gives us x equals negative 18 plus or minus 18 squared is 324, and 4 times 65 is 260, divided by 2. Which is negative 18 plus or minus the square root of 64, divided by 2. And that gives us negative 18 plus or minus 8 over 2. Now, these are two real answers now, so we have to keep going. We can't stop there because we can continue. Negative 18 plus 8 divided by 2 is negative 10 divided by 2, negative 5. And negative 18 minus 8 divided by 2 is negative 26 divided by 2, which is negative 13. So our two answers are negative 5 and negative 13, which means this was originally factorable. So part of the problem, once we know all these methods, is we have to learn how to be efficient. If it's factorable, we want to do that first because it would take a lot less time. Unless, of course, the problem tells you exactly how we want you to solve it. Let's do another one. Okay, so 2x squared minus 5x minus 5. So we have a equals 2, b equals negative 5, and c is negative 5. Again, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. The more you write it, the more you have it memorized. And of course you can look up the song. I'm not going to sing it for you here. So we have negative 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is negative 5, all divided by 2 times a, which is 2. So that's 5 plus or minus the square root of 25, and that's negative 4 times 2 is negative 8 times negative 5, which is plus 40, all over 4. So we get 5 plus or minus the square root of 65 divided by 4. 65 is 5 and 13, which can't be simplified, so that's our final answer. Okay, let's do another example. 5x squared minus 2x plus 4 equals 0. So my a is 5, b is 2, c is 4. So negative 2, negative b. I'll write it again. Okay, we'll write it again there. 2 squared minus 4 times 5, that's a, times 4, that's c, all over 2a, which is 2 times 5. So negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 minus 20 times 4 is 80 over 10. Negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 76 over 10. Negative 76 is 4 times 19. So the square root of negative 76 is the square root of negative 4 times 19, which is 2i radical 19. So we have to simplify our radicals as well. And we get negative 2 plus or minus 2i radical 19 divided by 10. And since 10, 2, and negative 2 all have a common factor of 2, we can simplify that into negative 1 plus or minus I radical 19 over 5. So we're dividing the 2 by 2, this 2 by 2, and this 10 by 2. We can't touch what's underneath that radical. Now let's talk a little bit about the discriminant. It's on your homework today, so the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. It's the part that's underneath the square root, and it tells us what kind of answers we have. If you think about the last two problems, the last one had a negative number under the square root, so we had imaginary answers. So if b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, we end up with two complex solutions. Complex means there's an imaginary number and a real number together. If b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0, think about what happens if we get 0 underneath here. If this is all 0, that goes away, and you get one answer, negative b over 2a. So we have one real and rational solution. And if it's positive, there's two different possibilities. If b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, and it's a perfect square, we get two real rational solutions. And if it's not a perfect square, we won't be able to completely get rid of the square root, so it'll be irrational. Two real irrational solutions. So let's look at an example. I'm just making something up. 4x squared plus 9x plus 7. So the discriminant is just the b squared minus 4ac part. So that's 9 squared minus 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is 7. So here we have 81 minus 16 times 7. I'll do a little work on that one. 112. And 81 minus 112 is going to be a negative 31. So because the answer is negative, that means the answer will have two complex solutions. Okay, let's do another one. Say x squared plus 6x plus 9. So we have 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9. That's 36 minus 36, which equals 0. So that's one real rational solution.